Thanks, Ashley. Good morning, everyone. It's always fun to introduce a friend and a fellow Rotarian. This is the second time recently I've had the opportunity to do that. At the Taste of White Bear, I was hanging out there and putting wristbands on people, as I recall. And Stephen Kelly came over to talk to me. And in the process of that, I kind of said, "What you doing these days?" He started talking about his work with AI. I said, "I think that'd be a great talk for us Rotarians to learn more about this." So he is here today. Also, some of us will recall that, oh my gosh, it's 3 years now in COVID. Stephen led us, many of us, in some dynamic living room conversations on a variety of topics. I think we talked about harmony and the opportunity gap and tolerance, and I think we did police community relations also. A process that many of us just really felt good about, and I think we wish we could have continued it, but we haven't, but maybe we'll get back to it sometime. Anyway, Stephen has been a member here for a while. His topic today is generative artificial intelligence, evolving capabilities, and where the technology is headed. He is currently employed in the Minnesota State Colleges and University System, where he is steering the development of statewide guidelines for the use of generative artificial intelligence systems in higher education. He's an original member of the GPT-3 beta tester community beginning in 2020. He has since pursued an interest in AI technologies, both personally and professionally. He lives here in White Bear Lake. He's a current member of our Rotary, as we said, and he has a charming little son. Stephen?
Thank you, Jackie. Bear with me. I'm going to take a couple minutes just to get set up here. Okay, well, it looks like we're live. Good morning, everyone. As Jackie introduced, my name is Stephen Kelly. I live here in White Bear Lake, and I work for the Minnesota State Colleges and University System. And I'm here to talk a bit about generative AI this morning. Now, I've known many of you for some years, and you may have never associated me with generative AI in the past. And so I want to talk a little bit about how it is I got into some of this work. So back in 2020, I work in education, and when I started hearing some rumblings in the developer community online, being a web developer myself, I started getting really interested in the conversations that people were having. They were talking about generative artificial intelligence. And what I learned early on was that this was a kind of technology that could create stuff. It could create blocks of text. It could create images. It could create all sorts of things. And as an educator, I thought, my goodness, there could be a real potential here to create a lot of learning materials for students. And being someone that works in technology in the education sector, I wanted to learn more about this. And this began my journey in artificial intelligence. I actually reached out directly to the president of OpenAI at the time and said, I've got an idea. I want to create really high quality educational materials. Can I get access? And he said, why, yes, you can. I became one of the first 3,500 people to be part of the beta tester community for GPT-3 back in 2020. Subsequently, I was also the chair of something called the Minnesota Learning Commons, which is a partnership between the Minnesota State College and University System, the University of Minnesota, and our Minnesota Department of Education. And beginning in spring of 2021, I started leading demos and presentations on the use of GPT-3 and how it could be applied to education. So this was about a year and a half or more before the drop of ChatGPT on November 30th of 2022. And we were already getting out ahead of this and getting into it. And it proved very prescient. What I told my colleagues, I said, this is going to change education. We need to look at it now. And we're real happy we got in early because it better positioned us to react now in the modern time. I'm also currently leading the development and operation of guidelines for generative artificial intelligence in our state college and university system. And I'm working with a group of attorneys, IT specialists, security experts, and other educators to put those together. It'll be the first of its kind here in the state. So I want to talk a bit about the growth of generative artificial intelligence before we hop into it. I'm also going to talk about exactly what this is. But before I get there, I want to impart the fact that generative AI didn't just come out of nowhere. It's real easy for it to feel that way because when ChatGPT hit the market, it just kind of took over everything in the news and suddenly it was here. But in fact, this has been an area of research going all the way back to the 50s. And in the last 10 years, the amount of research that's been stuck into generative AI has really taken off. So here we're looking at the number of generative AI research articles contributed or submitted to archive.org. And you can see all the number of papers start to really take off around 2015, 2016. And since that time, the number of papers in archive.org have only continued to increase higher and higher. And these are going to be papers that are contributed not just from American scientists, but from scientists all over the world. We've also seen unprecedented growth in the use of AI. Now, my background in technology, I used to work in social media, and one of the ways that we measured just how popular a brand new social media service was the amount of time it took for a service to get to 100 million active users. And some of the services that you're going to see up here, we've had for quite a long time. Services like Netflix and Amazon Prime, they're not social media, but they're very ubiquitous kinds of services. And it took years for these services to get to 100 million active users. As we got into social media tools that were relatively easy to sign up for free accounts, this started taking off at a faster clip. Gmail took 5 years to get to 100 million active users, Facebook a little bit quicker, so on and so forth. The big conversation was TikTok, because TikTok exploded a few years back and was getting to 100 million active users in 9 months. And that blew everyone in the tech sector away, because no one had ever seen growth even close to that. Until January, 2 months after ChatGPT hit the market, and it took just 2 months for OpenAI's ChatGPT to get to 100 million active users. And let's remember that ChatGPT wasn't the only generative AI game in town. It's just the one that was dropped that had the most advanced capabilities. Since that time, of course, the number of users on generative AI services is far beyond 100 million. I should say, though, just this week, actually, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, did mention that OpenAI ChatGPT does currently have 100 million active weekly users. So they are still seeing a lot of use at OpenAI. So what is this generative AI? You've probably heard of ChatGPT. You might have heard of some other services like Claude 2 or Google Bard. What generative artificial intelligence is a particular kind of artificial intelligence that's very different from the kind of artificial intelligence we've become accustomed to over the last, say, 25 years. So the kind of algorithms that power your search tools, Google, Bing, the kind of artificial intelligence that powers the feed in Facebook that tells you what things you might be interested, that's what's called weak forms of artificial intelligence. These are artificial intelligence that are meant to do a very narrow kind of thing and do it very, very well. Generative artificial intelligence is different. It's more general. And what makes it unique is it creates things. That's what's different. They are creation tools. And so how they go about doing this is all based upon what's called natural language processing. And they work with text and language. Now, what they can do with that text moves into a couple different modalities. So for instance, you have generators like ChatGPT, which is text inputs, text outputs. You have tools like DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, where you can put a text prompt in and it'll create an image for you, whatever you ask it to do. You have text to video, same kind of process as text to image, text to audio, and text to speech. Text to speech, we've had things that kind of look like this for a long time. Think of screen readers, think of different kinds of Siri and stuff you've had in your smartphones where, it will speak to you and read text and it sounds very robotic. That's not what the new text-to-speech generative AI is. The new text-to-speech generative AI is a kind of service that is fine-tuned by you. For instance, you can feed it 20 examples of you saying a phrase, and it will then produce a performance in your voice of anything you want. So if you want to hear yourself reading, the first 2 paragraphs of the Constitution, it will do that, and it'll sound just like you, and it'll read that in your voice. So when we talk about the ability to mimic and to do things like impersonate people, generative AI is taking off, and it's being able to do the whole gamut of impersonation. Just one of the things that people are worried about in terms of the use of this technology moving into the future. We're going to talk about more. There's also new kinds of services hitting the market, video to text, multimodal models. I'll talk a little bit about those, and interactive AI as well. But I want to hop into some of the capabilities here. Now, the presentation is going to get a little tricky. I've got video we're going to watch. It's not going to have sound, but you're going to get to see a lot of what's going on with some of these services. And I'll talk about it as we're watching that. We're going to fly through this pretty quick because we only have about 25 minutes. But I want to leave 5 minutes for questions at the end. So let's talk about some of the basic current capabilities of generative AI before we hop into where I think some of this technology is headed in the next 3, 5, or 10 years. So first of all, let's talk about ChatGPT. There we go. Wi-Fi is a little slow to get started here. So ChatGPT, you might be familiar with it. You give a text prompt to ChatGPT. ChatGPT will spit out an output of a bunch of text for you. You can ask it to create recipes for you. You can ask it to write a resume for you. You can ask it to write a college entrance essay for you. It can do all sorts of things with text. And it's expanding, in fact. Just this week, the capabilities of ChatGPT went what we call multimodal. What does that mean? It can do a lot more than just text-to-text now. ChatGPT 4.0 Turbo is what it's called. You can submit it an image, and it will tell you everything it knows about that image based on its interpretation. It now can listen to you, so it can be a personal assistant on your smartphone, for instance. It will interpret the language spoken to it, and it will give you responses back and talk back to you. It can speak, right? Now, if it's hooked up with a speaker, it can speak back to you. And it can do a lot of things like see and interpret the world. So if you embody this artificial intelligence, for instance, in an Android, it now can begin interacting with the world around it. This is what multimodal generative AI is. It's not just relegated to text anymore. It now can work through a whole bunch of different modalities. We're also seeing some really profound advances in text-to-image. So what we're seeing here is going to be from Midjourney, which just released an update here in the last few weeks. And it's amazing how rapidly this technology has advanced to produce really high-resolution, high-quality images. What we're seeing here is a showcase, prompts that humans put into Midjourney in the upper left-hand corner, and we see the results that Midjourney spits out. Most of these generative AI tools don't create just one image for you. What they do is they create a selection of images for you. So you get options, and you take your pick about what you like. I've seen ones that produce just 4 at a time. Some of the new capabilities in Stable Diffusion will produce up to 64 copies for you and allow you to work really quickly through things like brand creation for a company, right? What used to cost maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to have 200 examples of a brand created, Stable Diffusion will get you hundreds and hundreds in a snap for a fraction of the cost now. Also something that in the business world is really kind of ground shaking, and people are trying to figure out, what do you do with that, right? Because it's changing the way we work. There are also text-to-video services out there. This is something called Google Imagen. We're at the early stages of this technology. What we're seeing here is a video of Teddy washing dishes. Now, there's some abnormalities in this video, but it's a Teddy washing dishes, right? It looked like a Teddy washing dishes. And we only expect that the resolution and quality of these kinds of videos will get better through time. There are also services coming out. This is Gen 2 from a company called Runway. Really, really cool. So we can mash up some of our generative AI. Let's start in Stable Diffusion. Let's start in Midjourney. Give it a prompt, get a high quality image, go over to Runway, feed that image into Runway. Runway will turn it into a video. And on the right-hand side, you're seeing the videos that are being created from an image. Imagine taking an image of, this may be kind of creepy, your family at a park in a photo, feed into the AI, and it'll animate your whole family. That's very, very creepy, right? And so, but again, there are lots of practical, I think, uses in film and other industries for this kind of thing. If we're going to mock up commercials, if we're going to mock up movie trailers and things of that nature, this is a great starting point for a lot of creatives that are out there. Speaking of movie trailers, people are doing just this. You can start with images, and if you're willing to go into a video production software and mash everything up, you can create some pretty astounding quality products that can pass for, whoops, I apologize, that video was not starting the way it was supposed to. Let me try that one more time. It might be the Wi-Fi here. I am actually streaming video in through the Wi-Fi, and so that might be tripping it up just a little bit. Okay, well, it looks like it's not going to want to play that video, but what we were going to see there was a 50-second long movie trailer built 100% through artificial intelligence, taking images produced through something like Midjourney, animating them, stitching it all together for a full 50-second production. So in the film industry, if you're trying to pitch an idea, right, this would be a way you can rapidly develop lots of movie trailers and stories and then communicate that to a potential investor. It could also be used for things like startup companies and other areas like that. So where are things headed? Because this, again, is all current technology that I just shared. You could do this today if you wanted to. The technology is available either for free or for a subscription cost. But there are things also occurring right now behind the scenes that have not yet hit the market or hit the consumer sector. Let's talk about some of those. So one of them is the advancement in robotics technology. One of the things that I like to share with my colleagues is that the next big movement is going to be the embodiment of generative artificial intelligence, taking it and putting it in the body of an android. Here what we're seeing, this is not animation. This is real. This is high resolution camera on Boston Dynamics robot that has been asked to go and grab a tool bag, get it up to the worker up on the scaffolding and help him, kind of get that work done, right? So here the robot starts by seeing it needs to build a bridge, so it does that. It figures out it can't get up there without it. It goes and it grabs the tool bag as it's instructed to do. It's going to go and it's going to hop up these stairs, no problem. It's got all this down. It's going to be able to figure out how much strength it takes to throw the bag up on top, and then it wants to get down, but it recognizes it might hit its head on the scaffolding, so it's going to, push the box down. Of course, it will do an acrobatic dismount because why not? It's a robot, right? So it can just go ahead and do that. That's an example of a robot that can do a lot of kind of really fun, interesting things. But there's another movement right now in robotics that is looking at building robots for very specific purposes. And those purposes are labor. So this is we're gonna see a robot. This is the development process they went through. A robot called Digit from a company called Agility Robotics. Agility Robotics just opened up a factory on the West Coast here in the United States, and they're going to be producing 10,000 of these a year starting out. Now, what Digit is meant to do is very specific kinds of labor-intensive work that, in, for instance, a warehouse environment might create quite a few, for instance, workers' comp situations, right? By replacing humans and jobs that they, according to the company, humans really don't want to do, they put robots in there, and the robots do all of the work instead. Now, these robots are already deployed by one major US retailer. Does anybody want to venture a guess which US retailer that is? Amazon, that's right. Amazon's warehouses are now testing Digits out everywhere right now. And again, their message is we're putting them in places and jobs that humans don't really want to do and in areas where it might be dangerous for humans. And so this is one of the directions we see robotics and generative AI going right now. Again, you can't just have weak forms of AI because increasingly if these robots need to make some decisions about the changes in their environment because they're going to be working in dynamic environments, right? Just like humans are. They're going to need a smart generative AI in order to kind of solve those situations and keep on doing their objectives. Now, there's also movements and advances in robotics going on right now that are less labor-focused and are more, I would say, like humanities-focused, I don't know, socially focused. What we're seeing here is an example of an android from Engineered Arts named Ameca. Ameca is fully loaded with GPT-4 from OpenAI. And again, being multimodal, Ameca can do much more than just take text in and produce text. You're just kind of seeing here in the video, Ameca can talk. Ameca can hear, so when you talk to Ameca, I'm going to say she, can communicate back and forth to you. It might be better to say it. And what we're going to see here is Ameca can actually do some really interesting things that before this time we might have considered just intrinsically human. And that's create artwork. Now, we can go back and forth on the quality of this artwork, but what Ameca has been asked to do here is actually draw an image of a cat. So there's a lot of things cognitively going on here. Ameca needs to know what a cat is. Ameca needs to know the form of a cat. Ameca needs to know like how a cat sits and what it looks like to be able to create that form. Ameca also needs to know how to pick up a marker, has to know how to use a tablet here that she's using. And all of this requires not just sort of the cognitive interpretation of what Ameca is being asked to do, but Ameca has to know how to interact with this environment. Spatially, the android has to know where to put the marker, right? How to move and everything else. It's been trained not just on text, it's been trained on a huge body of environmental data, which allows it to do this kind of thing. So there are some really dark parts of generative artificial intelligence, and I went back and forth on whether I wanted to share this with the group today, but knowing all of my friends out here in Rotary and some of the work that we're involved in, especially in peace around the world, I felt like this was something that I needed to briefly mention. And that is, we are right now in an era, and it might not always be really obvious to us, that we haven't seen exactly since the 1950s or 60s in the space race. Right now, we're looking at generative artificial intelligence as something that's very, very similar to a space race. You might even say it's the new space race. There's tons of money being dumped into this, money that we can't even imagine. I'll talk a little bit about why that is at the very end. But much of this money on the government side, particularly for the United States government and China, is being invested into military defense spending. And right now in the United States, we have something called the Replicator Initiative. You probably haven't seen this on the New York Times front page. Do a Google search. You'll see that there's been many of a defense official has come out and talked about this in the last couple of years. The idea here is that the US government is producing thousands of small drones, but they're not like the drones that are used in places right now in war times around the world. These are drones that are faster, they're more capable, they can be armed with more weapons on them, and they're meant to do high precision targeting, right? So instead of indiscriminate bombing, I'm just gonna say that, these would be robots, drones that actually can kill with precision. Think of a bunch of thousands and thousands of drone snipers, essentially, are what these are. This is where a lot of money is being spent on the government side, both the United States and China, towards defense spending, right? And it is like a space race, but here it's an arms race, right? Some of you may have heard in the news that there were a lot of AI researchers that signed on to a letter earlier this year, said we have to stop all the research on artificial intelligence. The US government said, well, we can't do that. And the reason why is because, we can't allow other economies to get ahead of us with this technology because it would put us at economic risk. That's only one part of the story. The other part of the story is there's real concern inside the United States government, and the officials have said as much, that they're worried about other state actors developing this technology before us. And so I wanted to share that with the group today. I do encourage you to look up the Replicator Initiative. There are already deployed solutions in the US government right now that are very much like this. One is called Task Force 59, which occurs around the Arabian Peninsula. In this part of the world, the United States, protect's not the word, it surveils a large amount of water, the US Navy does, right? And with the resources and personnel that are there, it's very hard to police this entire body of water where there's a lot of piracy and other things going on. So the way the US government is solving for that is deploying dozens or hundreds of amphibious and aerial drones that then all communicate back to a central artificial intelligence at the naval base and do constant 24/7 risk analysis through all of these drones everywhere. And if there is a risk that's assessed, it's then communicated back to a human that's deployed for a decision on whether US forces will be deployed to that area to address the concern. This is how they're solving for the fact that there aren't enough resources to do the amount of military surveillance that the US government wants to do. But again, this is only one step away from having a central autonomous general artificial intelligence that can make decisions about all of what these drones are doing. If they're armed, well, they might be able to do more than just send image and audio data back, right? They could do much more than that. So not everything is doom and gloom though. So I'm gonna fly through this real quick because I recognize that we're at 8:22. There are some really exciting things in the area of generative AI that I think are genuinely gonna make life better for people everywhere. One of those, and I hope this is gonna make things better. It might just make things more troublesome with things like Facebook, but right now, Google and Apple are releasing brand new chips and processors for their smartphones. And we're seeing the first one hit with the new Google Pixel that's coming out. These brand new chips and brand new processors are meant to run generative artificial intelligence on them. It takes a lot of compute power to run an AI model, but with these brand new chips and processors, we'll be able to do it right inside our phones. Why is that a big deal? Because the actual amount of memory, like hard disk space that a generative AI needs, isn't very much. Our current smartphones already can take care of all of that. The challenge is getting the actual model on there and having the processing power. Once we have that, we will all have our own generative AI personal assistant in our pocket that we can train, that can learn all sorts of things about us, that can help us make decisions based on what it knows about us. In some ways, it could be an extension of ourselves, which can be either really creepy or really exciting, depending on how you think about it, right? We are also seeing advances in generative artificial intelligence in the medical industry. Generative AI holds a lot of promise in the area of developing really rapid testing and theoretical experiments for the development of new pharmaceuticals and drugs. Generative AI may actually be able to help us solve some of the most troubling diseases that humans have ever experienced, like, for instance, cancer and things of that nature. One thing that gets me excited is that There is an opportunity for us to do something that has been hard for us in education to do ever since online learning came about in the early 2000s, and that is develop true personalized learning for individuals. Personalized learning has always been a very laborious process for educators, but with the new forms of generative artificial intelligence, again, the kind of artificial intelligence that can be fine-tuned, trained by the individual and in their pocket, we may have actual AI tutors for every single child, every single student, every college student, university student, postdoctoral student, you name it. From the youngest age the parent wants to allow their child to interact with the AI, right up to folks who are, pursuing continuing education. You may have access to a kind of tutelage that you never had access before, and this could help level some playing fields too in terms of inequities, because historically, those who have been able to afford private tutors are those who are also in a position to pay for them, right? Another thing that we're looking at that I think is really exciting is in the way of translation services, especially in the government sector where you have a lot of social services being delivered, and in areas and communities where you have many folks who are coming from other countries and relocating and speakers of other languages. It can be hard finding enough translators to make services like social services or doctors' offices possible. With generative AI, we are probably going to see soon the deployment of AI within office spaces where it will be able to do the translation on the spot for the care provider and the patient that might be there as a speaker of another language. We are also seeing some breakthroughs that are going on. There's a company called Be My Eyes, which I keep close track of. You can look it up on the internet too. We may be able to finally provide a level of assistive services to folks who need accommodations for accessing web content in ways we never have before. The burden in education has always been that we had to do fine programming and other sorts of meta tags and other add-ons to make web pages accessible for people who are hard of sight, for instance. With generative AI, we're looking at solutions coming out where the AI actually interprets what's on the screen instead of what's in the code in the background, and can actually help the person who's trying to access the website and the kinds of materials navigate better and click better and read back and interpret what's on the screen for the person. This has never been possible. We've always fallen short in this area, but generative AI may finally allow us to provide services to people that need accommodations in ways we never have been able to before. And the last thing I want to share is about productivity and about autonomous vehicles. I was in San Francisco just a month and a half ago, actually, and was watching people get in and out of the autonomous cars that are on the roadways in San Francisco. I think we're going to see more of this moving forward. Generative AI is going to help solve for some of the issues of autonomous vehicles. For instance, autonomous vehicles have had a really hard time in snowy areas because they can't see the road. But the new forms of multimodal AI are going to be able to look at a lot more indicators in the environment and figure out what to do with cars. This could be a big productivity boost for our nation's and other nations' workers. If you spend your 90 minutes in your commute in the morning getting to and from work, suddenly you'll be able to work in the car to and from. So flying past my last slide here, the last thing I want to share is that there are two things that are driving this brand new space race. All right, and it's really compelling to say money, right? Now, in the case of Microsoft, yeah, I mean, there's obviously reasons that investments are being made. I think a lot of the large tech companies believe that absolutely, whatever this artificial general intelligence thing is, it's gonna create money. But the research hubs like DeepMind, like Anthropic, like OpenAI, they're not 100% profit driven. What's driving them is the push towards artificial general intelligence. What is artificial and general intelligence? Some sort of cast it as the idea of singularity or of Skynet from the Terminator movies or HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that's not actually what artificial general intelligence needs to be. All artificial general intelligence is an AI that is 100% autonomous. It can make its own decisions, it can have a singular objective, and once that objective is given to it from a human, it's free to pursue that objective however it wants. And when we realize that that is the definition, and that's the only place that this technology needs to get to, I think it becomes easier to understand that this is probably not a 2050 breakthrough. This is probably more a 2030 or even a 2025 breakthrough is what some people are saying now. Artificial general intelligence is coming, and that's why these R&D companies are pushing so hard. It's the new space race. Getting to AGI is the equivalent of getting to the moon. And there's a sub kind of goal beneath that the companies are going for. And that is what I term as a 100% conversant AI that is indistinguishable from human performance. The goal is to create Amica, which we looked at, but create an Amica in a way that you don't really realize that it's an android, or you don't realize it's a robot. Its behavior is indistinguishable from a human. So it can provide all sorts of different services for humans, and we're able to sort of cross that uncanny valley where we look at the android and go, you're not human, but you kind of scare me, right? They're trying to get beyond that point. The way this might look in terms of like online services is the chatbots you interact with on retail websites, you wouldn't ever know they're chatbots ever again. You would absolutely be convinced that it's a human you're speaking with. And so with that, I apologize, we only have 1 minute left, but I'm happy to stay longer for any questions folks might have. And thank you for having me today.